Good evening, everyone. We are so glad you have chosen to join us for this evening's Local History Happy Hour with Doug Halter. Without further ado, this evening's host and the Barbara Barnard Smith, Executive Director of the Museum of Ventura County, Elena Brokaw.
Hey, everybody, that is me. I'm the Barbara Barnard Smith Executive Director of the museum, and I'm delighted to be with you here again for our last episode of Local History Happy Hour with the museum. Local History Happy Hour is where we interview local and regional authors about their books and their lives. And tonight we have Doug Halter, who is the author, well, he's many things, but tonight we're going to be talking to him about his book, Give Me Time, The Life and Times of Douglas Halter. Before we launch into our discussion, I want to let you know we would love to take your questions, also your information about dog breeds, anything you want to share really, and you can put that into we'd like you to put it in the Q&A section of the Zoom or in anywhere on Facebook, because we're also doing this by Facebook Live. You can put it in the chat, the Q&A. Our research library and archives director, Dea Terrafranca, is going to be looking at those questions, and we'll take them later on this evening. Okay, this is Happy Hour, as well as about local history. So before we get started, I would like to ask our guest of honor what his drink of choice is.
Well, thank you, Elena, for this opportunity. It's great to hear that everyone's joining us. So thanks to everyone's on the screen. I don't see the names, but you read some of them. My drink of the hour is a Tanqueray and tonic. And unfortunately, I didn't have a lime. So I usually like it with a lime. So it was a busy day with the city today. So we got a lot done. But nonetheless, I definitely earned this Tanqueray and tonic, and I hope you guys can share one with me. I wish we were in person so we could really get a chance to enjoy company, but this is the next best thing.
It is too bad that we're not, certainly have been doing these by hybrid, but because of the latest surge in the numbers, we have decided to not do any actual events at the museum. The museum galleries are still open, and we will be doing events outside as we can, but we just, in an abundance of caution, we have decided to move back to the online and digital version of our program. So thanks, Doug, for being a good sport and going along.
Absolutely, of course.
Okay, so let's talk about your book. So The book, as the subtitle says, is about you and your life, from pre-birth, when you talk about your ancestors. By the way, there is a mafia connection there, just a little teaser. Later on.
It's an interesting part of the story.
Yeah, well, it's actually even more interesting than what you have in the book. So maybe you'll share more
with
it.
Yes, I could.
Are you sure? Because we don't,
I don't know who's listening, but maybe I'm safe with this crowd. Okay.
And it goes from way back when to actually just about 8 months ago.
Yeah.
So obviously you didn't have room to talk about everything, but you do pack a lot into these 356 pages. And, one of the things that really struck me was how incredibly open and honest you are. And I think it's an interesting and an important book right at this point in time. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just to set the tone for our conversation, I'd really love for you to start us with a quote. And the quote I'd like you to read is from the epilogue of the book, actually, where you kind of summarize a lot of things that are in the book. The book is actually not chronological. So a through line of the book is your diagnosis with the HIV virus and your living with AIDS and all of your experiences with that. And then you sprinkle in the rest of your life throughout. But anyway, could you just read us the quote on page 339?
Absolutely. Okay. There's so many quotes that I would like to read, but this one's kind of sets the tone of a very important part of my life. And so it's about reading from the book, is that tragedy, the dark cloud of death, the loss of so many that in my mind will forever be young and beautiful. But now are from a different time. That tragedy united the LGBTQ community. Allies were everywhere, and the AIDS quilt told stories of thousands of God's most beautiful souls. These beautiful people had dreams, stories of love, community, action, fearlessness, and sorrow. There were deep social assessments, as from a deceased soldier who asked, "Why did I get a Purple Heart for killing a man and got a dishonorable discharge for loving another man?" I knew then that humanity would be forever more aware and grow through these sad times. And many like myself would never again deny who we are. We will continue to make advancements, if for no other reason than to honor those whose lives were cut short and did not have the chance to see another sunrise. I thought it was a good spot to start, Elena, because that's really a big part of what motivated me these last 30 plus years. And is what we witnessed in the 80s and all the way through the mid 90s, and to some extent still continues today. And that's seeing a lot of my friends and my partner stricken down by this AIDS pandemic, a pandemic that we knew nothing about as we were growing up as kids, and ended up making a major change in trajectory of what direction my life is heading. And quite frankly, none of us really can control the cards that were dealt. I've learned so many things over the years. But what really defines us, I think, are the decisions that we make along the way. And I have never, somebody told me 30 years ago that I would be here today talking to you, sharing my story, and that a time period when I didn't know I would even be around to turn 30, and I actually am 61 years old today, or not today, but this year. I wouldn't have believed anybody. I mean, long-term planning for me for a good part of my life was 3 months, really. You know, it's taken me a long time to get off that mode, because I think this interview may end up being a lot like the book, where it's completely out of sequence, but from the story of my life. But the reality is, you know, I had talked about growing up in my upbringing in Northern California, and I consider it a very normal, average, surrounded by immigrant Italians, you know, in San Jose, California. Going to Santa Cruz to enjoy the beach, and having lots of teenagers and other kids around our neighborhood, and then discovering and understanding that I was gay, and I had no idea that I myself were something that I knew society would hate me for. Back in the 70s, it was a far different world than what it is today. And I mentioned, Elena, I said it in the book as well, but, you know, I know we all have a story to tell. And I think that's part of what I love about meeting new people, is I love hearing their story and hearing their perspectives and how they weigh things in life and what was important to them, and what caused them to be who they are, you know. But I think for me, it was just, I have made a lot of decisions that unbeknownst to me actually led me to be the person I am today, that led me to still be alive today. When I had diagnoses from 34 years ago that I wouldn't make it through the next year, you know. So it was a story I thought that was worth telling. It was a story that I know there's a lot of lessons that I've learned that I thought I should share. And as I think you know, I've been speaking in classrooms across the state for many years now about the AIDS pandemic. And one final thing on that is that I believe that stories like mine are important to tell, because it tells about the humanity and the emotions and the turmoil that you don't read in history books. I think the history books are yet to define what truly transpired with the AIDS pandemic. And I believe there's silver linings in everything, including this. So that's a starting.
Yeah, you know, I think that's interesting, because we do, as the director now of a history and art museum, I think a lot about history and what brings history to life. And there is no question that it is the story of the people. And that's what happens in your book, is that you are talking about a huge, you know, life, a time in history that really changed so many people's awareness and thoughts about entire lifestyle, and was so life-changing for so many. And you really make it very personal, and you invite us into that. So with that, you know, I've always known that you are somebody who's living with AIDS. And you talked about the decisions that you made. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey from discovering that you were HIV positive to where you got to where you were going out and talking about AIDS in the classroom in so many schools?
I'll be happy to. I will say prior to my diagnosis, I knew that there was a disease out there. I knew they initially called it GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. I never thought it would ever impact my life. My life was really going down a path that I thought was pre-described. It was a path of going to college, getting my engineering degree, working for corporations, trying to move up in that corporation. Honestly, it was a path that was not the path I would have chosen, but I did because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. With that said, I had met Randy Morrison, and you'll see there's a lot of Randys in my life. If you read the book, it gets very confusing, but Randy Morrison was truly probably the first person I ever fell in love with. And I never thought I could ever meet somebody like him, and somebody that I couldn't wait to see, and never had enough time with. And so when we got together and it turned into a relationship, we bought our first house on Polite Street in Ventura. Even though I had gone to college in Santa Barbara, a lot of my friends from college ended up in Ventura, and they say, hey, you got to try Ventura. It's a lot like Santa Barbara used to be before it went so chic. And with that said, I've never regretted that decision. I love it here. Randy, we were at a point in our life that our careers were taking off, and he used to teach gymnastics, and I was working for Unisys Corporation selling computers. And he just wanted to get tested for HIV, as kind of the test had been out for a few years. And we just wanted to dot an I, cross a T. It was kind of a detail. It wasn't anything that was supposed to be life-changing. And it was important to him. So I had him make the appointments. I hate doing things like that. And we went in and got a blood test, and we came back 2 weeks later to get the result. And to our dismay and disbelief, it came back that we're both positive. And that was one of the points in my life that was a significant change in my life, to be there when the doctor put his hand on mine, and Randy was in a different room waiting to hear from the doctor at the time, but telling me that I'm sorry to tell you, but your test came back positive. I had every excuse in the book why he had the wrong test, that he had the wrong file. I had no idea I was that good at denial. But truly what filled my mind at that point in time was, how could I have what people knew as a dirty gay disease? How could I have a disease that at 27 years old was going to end my life within a year? As a matter of fact, the doctor at that point told me that, I would have probably, if I'm lucky, I might have another year, but I needed to go home and get my affairs in order. And that they would do everything they can while I was dying from this disease. But there was really nothing they could do for me that was too late. And I should spend my time telling others what mistakes I made so they don't make the same mistakes. With that, when I left that room, I saw Randy Morrison walking down the hallway, and I could tell by the look on his face, he was told the same thing. We immediately, without telling the whole story in a 45-minute segment here, is we chose not to tell anybody. We were in disbelief that we really had this disease. We thought the people who were getting sick and dying were people who didn't live healthy lifestyles. We had, again, you start coming up with reasons why, what the information that we were given was not really accurate or true.
Bargaining.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. So all that said, the first time we told somebody was in '89, 2 years later. And with that, it was two friends of Randy's down in San Diego who called us up to tell us they were HIV positive. About 15 minutes into the conversation, we owned up and told them as well. And then we had some camaraderie there, a chance to kind of share ideas and concerns, and they were doing holistic medications, so it gave us some hope that it might be a way to stay alive. And we had already lived by that point longer than our doctors gave us to live, And it was a year later that Randy came down ill, and within 4 months went from being a 26-year-old, beautiful, vibrant gymnast to a very frail, near-death individual. And when he did pass away in 1990, that was December 15th, 1990, that was truly the biggest turning point in my life. And the lessons, that was now 31 years ago. And when I think about him dying, and I think about the fact that I used to always introduce him as my best friend or my roommate, my life was not public like it is today. It was people close to us knew who I am, and who my partner was. Randy was very proud of who he was. He didn't care who knew anything. And so he always hated it when I introduced him as my roommate, which I don't blame him in hindsight, but it's what you did back in the 80s and 90s. And all that said is, that day that he died, I promised myself that I would live my life as openly and honestly as I could for whatever weeks or months I had to enjoy being on this planet, in honor of Randy, who lost his life way too soon. And then so many other dozens of friends that have passed away shortly thereafter. And I learned that I promised that not only will I live my life openly and honestly, but I'll stretch my comfort zone and make sure that I stand for what I believe in and try to make sure every day made a difference. And to this day, when I go to bed at night, I think about, did I make a difference today, or did I get caught up in the noise? So with all that, we saw the need with AIDS care to provide services for people with AIDS, because outside of the major cities, there was really no services available. Public health was the only game in town. And back then, there was a lot still to learn. So we started up AIDS care. It brought the LGBTQ community together, rallying around the fact that so many, especially gay men, were dying. And so many of the women, to our surprise, because the men and women in the gay community weren't really close before, but it brought us real close, because the women, I think there's a motherly instinct where they were just beside themselves that all their gay brothers were dying. And I'll never forget how much they came to our rescue. And then we started the AIDS care, or AIDS partnership, in the early 90s, to bring in, it was Elton John funded services for suburban America, because he of all people, a known gay individual, realized that a lot of the funds for AIDS services was going to the metropolitan areas and not out to the suburbs. So we became one of the 26 partnerships across the country, thanks to a lot of good people putting the paperwork together at the Community Foundation and at United Way. We formed AIDS care, and AIDS was very controversial. I never thought I would live long enough to see another pandemic, another disease be so political as AIDS was. But unfortunately, I'm here witnessing it right now, you know. So that began my involvement in the community, that began my involvement standing for what I believe in, and knowing that when somebody says somebody ought to do something, why doesn't somebody do this, or why don't they do that? Knowing that if you thought it, you not only have a right, but a responsibility to share that with other people. And everything begins with an idea. You just have to believe in yourself enough to know that your idea might be worthwhile. And that changed my life. And just thinking that way, believing in myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So by the way, people have brought up, some people have brought up some comparison with the COVID crisis, and they compared it to the AIDS epidemic. What do you think about that, since you've lived through both?
Well, yeah, it's been interesting to see, because there's a couple of things. One is COVID they're both viruses that attack your DNA, your RNA actually, and so, but COVID is much more contagious, and so it's a lot easier to get, but it's far less deadly than HIV. HIV is harder to get. It's a very fragile virus. It has to be almost direct bodily fluid to blood contact through needles, or through intravenous needles, or through sex. So seeing how political AIDS was, or HIV was, because of who it hit first. It hit the people that were marginalized in communities. It was a gay community that truly was not really well accepted throughout the world. So it was a fringe of society. So it took the current president of our United States back then his entire 8 years and didn't mention AIDS. That's why the gay community came together. So now when I see this pandemic, I see how fortunate we are that within a year we received a vaccine, and we're still waiting 40 years later. We still don't have a vaccine or a cure for HIV. And I don't know how much of that is politics versus technicalities. I think the speed at which COVID has some advantages for finding vaccines is my guess. But I guess I became so used to being a guinea pig. I took drugs from the underground drug market because we couldn't afford when drugs came out, we couldn't afford the cost. We took, I was on the first trial for a protease inhibitor, which ended up saving my life. So I have no problem. I have no problem taking a vaccine and knowing that I have a better chance of staying alive because of it. I have an utmost belief in science. And it's sad to know that in today's age that people are politicizing yet another virus. I know for humanity, mankind's enemy really isn't each other. We forget that. It's not each other. It's not, it's really viruses, disease, lack of education, poverty, hunger. Those are the things that we should be addressing. And hopefully dealing from the same factual information and taking risks that we all feel comfortable with, knowing what the consequences may be. So taking the vaccine was a no-brainer for me, but I understand why it is for others to a certain extent.
I'd like to, we can just talk about just this all night, but I want to take the conversation away a little bit. When I first heard about the book and started to read the book, it's called Give Me Time. And I figured that referred to the fact that you really, like you just talked about, when you first were diagnosed or were told that you were HIV positive, the doctor said, go and get your papers in order. So you didn't have time. But in thinking about it and thinking about you, you in general always need more time. This is just who you are, Doug. A lot of you on the call, I know you know Doug, I know you know him well, and he's always over busy. He's always doing too many things. He's, let's see, he runs the business that he has. He's on the city council. He is a major board member in way too many things. He's a chair of the Rubicon board. Anyway, I could go on and 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 on. I forgot my question. Oh, no, I know. Oh. One of the things that I loved in reading this was reading about your early business days and some of your achievements. So because it's not how I think of you. I think of you as running the landscaping business, which is the landscaping business of everything. But can you tell us about the toilet paper roll?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. That was my, I got to tell you, I feel like I lived many different lives, but I graduated from UCSB with my chemical engineering degree in 1982. I went to work for Procter & Gamble here in Oxnard, and this was part of the paper division. So we made Charmin toilet tissue and Bounty paper towels. And my job was to try to do cost savings projects that, but we weren't allowed to touch the product. So we did things like I was in charge of trying to see if our production line could use a thinner poly wrap, a thinner plastic to wrap the product in, because the product was well defined and was marketed a certain way. I could also touch the core. When at the end of the toilet paper, there's a core. Well, Procter & Gamble, in all their wisdom, had marketing showing that people like a white core. Right? When the paper's done, it just feels clean to people. So white bleached paper is very expensive. So my project that I endeavored to make work, and it did, was to what if we had paper that was bleached on one side and brown craft paper on the other side? And then the core is wound together with two sheets of paper, right? So if you wind the brown craft paper together, you end up with a white core. Then you save a lot of money on bleaching. Like I think the Oxnard plant saved over $1 million on that. that project alone per year. And that all adds up to real money, right? We're so used to talking about billions these years, but $1 million is still a lot of money. And well, we had to make sure that when you wound that white paper together, that little line was so small that people wouldn't notice that it was brown on the inside. So with that, I got a promotion and I was sent to North Carolina. I had never lived outside of California, so I went to North Carolina to start up a feminine hygiene product. There was nothing like the gay guy from Southern California moving to the deep South to start up a product, a women's product that I had no idea anything about the product and what it would do or not. So it was always feminine napkins. And my part of that project was I was in charge of all the glues and surfactants, so how well it sticks, stays in place, put it that way. Okay. And also I was the one that implemented the wings. It sounded like a good idea just from what I knew from biological books, biology books and so forth, but I really had no idea if the wings would work or not. But I stayed in North Carolina for 2.5 years before I got offered a promotion to go to Cincinnati, Ohio. And I thought about it one night and then went back into work the next morning and gave my 2 weeks notice. I learned then, no matter how much I love traveling, I had no idea how much I took for granted being born and raised in California. I think this is the most fortunate, blessed place on earth. And I think our only disadvantage in California is our inability to govern. But other than that, we have every major asset that any place in the world would be so fortunate to have even one of. So I quit and came back to California. But that was my experience with Procter & Gamble in the paper manufacturing division. And I could have stayed there my entire career.
I just got to stop and say, half of you don't know what we're talking about, but the wings are fantastic. Okay, so I'll just say that. Some of you know, I was very impressed when I learned this about.
All right.
All right, so let's go back.
I'm glad they worked. That's great.
Let's talk about the part of the book about your ancestors. And I'm a history museum, so I love history. But can you tell us about I think it's your great grandfather who immigrated to America? Right. Is that right?
He was the first.
Can you tell us about how he came over and his family?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is interesting because my family, like most immigrant families, they stay together for at least the first few generations. They stay very tight. My great-great-grandfather was the first one to come at the end of 1800s. And he came over with a company that solicited Southern Italian men and he lived in Gremento Nova, just outside of Naples and Sorrento in that area. And this company was called Miller and Lux. Miller and Lux was a cattle company based in Los Banos, California. And so he was brought over and he worked for 20 years for room and board. And after 20 years, he was then allowed to bring his family over. So he brought my great-grandmother over and her sister. They were the last two alive in the family by that point in time.
Wait. So he was there for 20 years before he could bring anybody over? And I just want to point out that
20 years.
And his wife died during that time.
Yes, his wife died.
So he brought over his only remaining, he had 2 daughters that came over. Is that right?
Yes, he brought over, actually one daughter went to Canada and one ended up coming to California. And my great-great-grandfather befriended my great-grandfather and showed him a picture of my great-grandmother, and which quite frankly probably wouldn't do much for us today. They were she wasn't the prettiest woman, but nonetheless she had good genes. My sister's laughing at me, but she's my great-grandfather said that he would marry her. He'd be happy to marry her, so he did. And San Jose was an Italian town, so he moved down from Canada, my great-grandfather, who had been in the country for about 10 years by that point in time, and came to San Jose. And downtown San Jose was all Italian. That's where Bank of America started. It was Bank of Italy initially. And honestly, I was just in downtown San Jose over the weekend, and it was just amazing seeing the street names, Ozare and Taylor, and all the streets that my grandparents, brothers and sisters, and my great-grandmother lived on. But we have 300 to 400 relatives in San Jose, Santa Cruz area today. thanks to somebody, my great-grandfather, having the wisdom to take a risk and go halfway around the world and go to a place that he's only heard of in books called California. And oh, by the way, when we went to, I took my cousin share where my great-grandmother was from in Gramento Nova. And we went to the museum there in Gramento, which was a 2,000-year-old town. And we told them that we were from this area, our familia is from here. And he asked where we're from, and we said California. And he says, his next word was, oh, Los Baños. So even 100 years later, it was so impactful that tens of thousands of Southern Italian men were taken from these villages and sent to California, that the first thing out of his mouth when he heard California was Los Baños. That's where Miller and Lex was based out of. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah. So but with that.
Oh, sorry. I just want to ask, which of your ancestors was it who ended up in jail after he met your...
Oh, yes. Oh boy. Now you're getting to the nitty-gritty. That was my grandfather.
Okay.
Yes. Because
your beloved grandfather. Your grandfather was very important to you, right? Yes.
My grandfather, I used to be called my grandfather's shadow because I was with him all the time. And he was truly the biggest mentor in my life, you know, and he taught me everything about plants, about the forests up in the redwoods in Santa Cruz. And so he's probably, I don't think a day goes by when I think about some of the things that some of the things he told me when I was a kid. You have a lot going on there, huh? I see somebody in the corner.
The hat.
Sorry. It's all good. Come in and say hi. No. All right, sorry. But any case, so what had happened is my grandfather met they used to call my grandmother and her sisters the Morosco Sisters. Her last name was Morosco, and they were very beautiful women. And he actually, I believe initially I had fallen in love with my Aunt Jay, my great Aunt Jay, but then ended up really falling for my grandmother. And my great grandmother used to lie about everybody's ages. So he thought my grandmother was 15, but she was actually 14. And she had gotten pregnant. So my great grandfather threatened him that they needed to marry her to do her honor good. And he ended up spending some time in jail. And then after that, he wrote a letter and said how much he loved her and wanted to marry her. And that began our side of the family, which from my grandparents on down, there's probably 80 of us alone on this part of this branch of the family. So, but my grandfather really, he used to say things to me even before we started hearing more of these different quotes recently, saying things to me about, if your roots are strong, there's no need to fear the wind. And things like never tell people your personal business. Well, I really listened to that one. I wrote a whole book. He's probably turning over in his grave. But I oftentimes think of things that my grandfather would think about how we live today. And I thought about it during the Great Recession, and I knew the biggest difference between the Great Recession and what my grandfather told me about the Depression era was during the Depression, people would knock on doors to see if they could wash windows, if they could mow lawns, if they could prune trees. In the Great Recession, quite frankly, without having a permit or a license or business license or insurance, you really can't legally do that sort of stuff, So we became a much more bureaucratic society. And I think a big part of my goals as I now on city council is to help simplify, know what we need to regulate, how to do that in a way that doesn't take tremendous amounts of resources to regulate and monitor the things that we do, but do it in a way where we could simplify life again. Because I'm all about looking at what are we encouraging and discouraging from happening with our policies, with our legislation, our ordinances, and the intended consequences and the unintended consequences. So I believe we should make the path of least resistance the path that is truly in the best interest of the entire society. And because I believe one of the universal laws of the universe is everything follows the path of least resistance. And I do know that while people have the intellect to not follow that path of least resistance, I believe en masse, people tend to follow the path of least resistance. So what does all that mean? It means that I have a great passion for stepping back and looking at how we legislate, how we run our cities, how we run our governance, and how we can encourage people to believe in themselves and develop their potential, and make sure that we encourage people to be creative and be innovative and think of new ways that can benefit all of society. And that should be the path of least resistance, that government helps to direct people to take that path. I know what it's done for me in my life, because in my life, I've, since Randy Morrison had died, and I knew that death was basically imminent, there was a huge change. What the biggest change is that I was living life without fear, because when the worst thing that can ever happen to you happens, there's really nothing else to fear in life. And when you live life without fear, it's the freest feeling you could ever have. So building my first house on Buena Vista Street, or building another one next door, or starting a business that I never meant to be a business, and having 70 some odd employees, it was really, people say, wow, that was really courageous to do these things. Or, getting on a trial that to try to save my life when I had no immune system left. There was really nothing to lose in my mind. I made prudent, cognizant decisions, but I really had nothing to lose. And so I was forced down a path of believing in myself and trying to make a difference, and knowing that I wanted to, I had many things I wanted to accomplish in a very short period of time. And I want everyone to not go through what I went through, but to understand how important every single day is, and the fact that every single one of us has a unique gift to make a difference in this world. So the more people that we get to understand that and to believe in themselves, and the more we are excited to wake up in the morning and not knowing who we're going to meet or what opportunities may come your way, people will truly understand how beautiful life is. And I think we could create the best society imaginable. That was a lot to say, and I didn't mean to say it all at once. This is supposed to be a dialogue.
No,
Okay.
no. It's really great, and it brings up a lot of follow-up. But before I get to my follow-up, we have a lot of questions that have come in the Q&A, and I really want to make sure that we have a chance to do that. So I have a bunch more questions, but everybody else does too. So I'm actually going to ask Dea to step in and let us know what the Q&A is and who is asking what. Dea, I hope you're still there. We just see your picture.
I am still here. Thanks very much, Elena. It's been really delightful getting to hear this dialogue this evening. So thank you, Doug, for joining us. The first question in our Q&A is from Ivor Davis. And he asks, in your book, you talk about starting the Ventura Music Festival and also the fascinating story of buying the building that is now Rubicon. Can you tell us about that and your passion for promoting the arts in our community?
Excellent. That's a great question, Ivor. I wish I could say I planted it, but yeah, it was a great question for you to ask. We're just of like minds. I actually was on the board of conveners for the music festival and was and became one of the earlier presidents for a few years, actually. And a lot of very good people that have grown to become my friends and people I highly respect were part of that endeavor. I also had the wherewithal to understand the value of art and culture for a community. And it's something that I believe with every bone in my body that art and culture is every bit as important to society as math and science and reading and writing. And the reason why it's so important, it's more important today than ever, is because I love how diverse the humanity is. I love knowing that we all have different experiences. We come from different backgrounds, different religions or faiths, and different experiences, you know. But today more than ever, we're so divided, and we got to think back to our common humanity, and that common humanity is what connects us through the arts. We could sit and watch a performance or listen to music or see a piece of art and feel the same jubilation or excitement or wonder or sorrow. And it reminds us that we're all part of the same community. And art and culture is extremely, extremely powerful for bringing people together and reminding people of the beauty of the world that we live in. And for that reason, I participated and spent a lot of time helping to create the music festival. I got actually very lucky because through the music festival, Carolyn Burns became a very good friend, as did Elena, by the way. And but Carolyn, talk about a major, well, we have so many jewels in this community, but Carolyn, when I told her I had bought a church and I showed her that church and I said, I really think it could be a theater. We were thinking community theater, or I was, and she was the one that said her lifetime dream was to start a professional theater, and she was working on a company that she was calling Rubicon. So that became the home of Rubicon. And I'm still president of that today. I'm very proud of it because Rubicon has done so much for elevating Rubicon and the music festival and focus on the masters, and the botanical gardens has done so much to raise the awareness of our creativity and natural beauty and talent that we have in our community. So I will always support the cultural arts in this community. It creates a beautiful community for us to all enjoy a quality of life that has become more rare in throughout the world, but we managed to retain that here in the city of Ventura. Other questions? Do we have any time?
We do. We've got more questions, and we have more time. From Louise Sherman, can you sort of let us know what the status is of AIDS prevention today in Ventura County?
Okay. Status of AIDS prevention today is twofold. About 12 years ago, AIDS United, which is an international organization and tends to guide a lot of direction for how the world and the World Health Organization looks at this AIDS pandemic, went from doing things that I started doing initially almost 30 years ago, and that's speaking in classes and educating people about the AIDS pandemic and letting people know that it exists in every community across this world and that you need to take precautions and not put yourself at risk. We went from educating people, which had success, but marginal success, to in the last 12 to 15 years, we switched to knowing that we have medication that's become available over the last 20 years or 25 years. Protease inhibitor is the main ingredient of prescriptions or drugs that have kept me alive and has restored my immune system to something that I could live with. And we know that by being on these medications, if we let people know to get tested, find out your health status, that there's medication out there that one way or another, at least in this country, we will get you that medication. And if you're on that medication, it will significantly lower the virus that exists in your bloodstream. By lowering the amount of virus in your bloodstream makes it virtually impossible to transmit it. So that's the new tactic today, is get people tested, find out their health status, and get them on medication to stop the ability to transmit this virus. And secondly, those people who still put themselves at risk, there's drugs that is that they would take ahead of time before they engage in any risky activity. But the real thing is to know that for people to really be taught, and I think we have said this over and over 40 years, is we have one body, you know, we need to take care of that, and we need to make sure that we don't make a foolish decision, because one foolish decision could put our entire life at risk. But fortunately, we may not have a cure or a vaccine, but we do have medication that is keeping a lot of us alive. So that's the current status so far. Do we have time for another question?
We do. This is actually a comment from Carrie Eller. Thank you for the wings. So we have another fan in the house.
All right.
And then from Greg Strang, I hope I pronounced that correctly. How did you meet your current husband, Randy?
That's from Canada.
Oh yeah, Greg's from Canada. That's great. This is the best part about Zoom, because Greg wouldn't be here if we just did it at the museum. Thanks for asking, Greg. I'm glad you're listening. I met Randy. Randy Encinas is my husband, and I know. And ironically, I met Randy Morrison in the same location that I met Randy Encinas, and that was at Oil Can Harry's down in Studio City, country western nightclub. Now, the most difficult thing about a gay country western nightclub is that they have two-step and slow dances. So trying to figure out who leads and who follows is kind of tricky. You know, it's not as obvious as a man and woman couple. And while I told Randy Encinas that I'll lead, I think that lasted all of 10 seconds before he took over. So that kind of staged our relationship for the next 30 years. So that's the short of it. Hey, I got to tell you, along with that, oh, go ahead. Ask me another question.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say is that, you know, it's funny because here it is, you know, I mentioned Randy and I got married 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago. And when we tell people we've been together 30 years, they said, well, what took you so long to get married? And I have to remind them, well, it was against the law to get married. And it's just it makes me laugh because how quickly, especially people in California, how quickly you would forget how fast rights have been restored or given in the equality for the LGBTQ community. We still have a ways to go in many other areas, but I'm very honored to have been able to call Randy my husband and actually get married. And that was truly the best day of my life when that happened.
And I have to say, you know, you should read the book. Because there are a lot of again, he's very honest and open. His grandfather would not approve. And there are a lot of great things about their relationship, nothing salacious. It's just, it's a really fun glimpse into this couple that so many of us on this call know so well, and into their, you know, what really makes them tick and makes them get along, and what didn't work and how they made it work. It's a fun read.
Thanks, Elena. I gotta tell you that Give Me Time was my sister's idea. She was thinking about the book, and she mentioned that she had a dream about my brother who had passed away 18 years ago now. Another Randy, by the way. Also Randy. I know, go figure. It's a full house. And her first husband too. But all that said is that she said, what do you think about naming your book Give Me Time? And I had about 15 different names going through my head, but that was perfect because of the reasons that you said. First off, Elena, is that it's the fact that I didn't know I would have so much time, and the fact that I was beating the clock and beating the odds every day that I stayed alive. But more than that, as I continue to do the things that I have a passion for, and to stretch my comfort zone and help lead and create different things, whether it's helping with the music festival, Rubicon, Botanical Gardens, and running for city council, is there are so many things I want to get done, and I'm trying to fit 10 lives into a short span of time. So it's taken me a while to get off that that hamster wheel and actually slow down and remember to enjoy every minute of it. You know, and life is about relationships. It's about making a difference in other people's lives, you know, and knowing that, you know, as I said early on to start with, is that you don't control necessarily what cards you're dealt. It's the decisions you make. And we all have a chance of sharing our unique potential to making this world a better place. That I know. So if this book helps people to believe in themselves and tells a story about a kid growing up with many different adversities in the state of California, I think it is a snapshot of a very beautiful 60 years on this planet.
I totally agree. Okay, so we have 5 minutes, and Dea, there's one question in Q&A, and then I sent you another one that I saw. So I want to have enough time to answer both of those questions.
There is one more. So from David Wilk, in your book, you tell us about an idea to build an amphitheater at the bottom of the Ventura Botanical Garden. Can you describe what that would be?
What's so fun is that it was through David's this book. I couldn't have done it without him. And he's become a very close friend to me through the year of writing this book. But it was through his insistence that I had so many ideas, having been so passionately in love with the city of Ventura for 35 plus years. And one of the things in starting the botanical gardens in Midge Stroke's living room, we decided that botanical gardens would add benefit to our community and a benefit to our quality of life. For me, it was more than about a collection of plants, a museum of plant collections. It's really about providing amenities that can improve our quality of life in the most duplicative site in our county that describes why we all live here. Ocean views over the historic core of one of California's original cities. And along with that, we had in the original master plan to build an amphitheater. And if you look at where the entrance of the Botanical Gardens is on that upper parking lot, the canyon to the left, to the west of there, is where we initially proposed an amphitheater of up to 4,000 seats. And that was in the master plan up until the final approval of our leases, because we have many different leases from the city of Ventura. We chose to, in order to move the botanical gardens, the gardens forward into where we could actually start doing things up there on that site at Grant Park, we removed the amphitheater. And I still hope temporarily, because imagine an amphitheater, whether it's 2,500 seats or 4,000, imagine a 4-story parking structure behind City Hall that creates the plaza at the entrance of a beautiful world-class botanical gardens and the entrance of a cultural arts center and amphitheater where people can sit and listen to live performances and beautiful music overlooking the historic downtown and the Channel Islands in the beautiful Pacific, protected from the east and west winds by the hillsides. It's a perfect, perfect location. And that's something that I won't give up, whether I'm on council or just a private citizen or just somebody who loves this area. I believe it's something that really will add significant benefit to our quality of life. Thanks for asking, David.
Okay, we have just one more question that came in via the chat. And it is, what was the LGBTQ community like in Ventura County during the AIDS epidemic? What kind of activism was going on in the county? And this is sort of connected to your answer about meeting your present husband. Where would members of the LGBT community meet before there was a Patty's?
Wow. Great question. I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you for asking it. And I'll try to summarize and just say, usually the way you met people in the LGBTQ community, which we always call the gay and lesbian community back then, is since expanded. And now some people call it the alphabet people because they keep adding alphabets to the name, is but a lot of us would drive to LA. Hence why I met Randy down at Oil Can Harry's in Studio City, because there wasn't any place. There's no internet. I know it's hard for people to remember that, but there's no internet. And so we would go down to a nightclub. There are some places that were known to be friendly to gay people that you might meet people as well, but usually a nightclub. And I will say, and I'm going to throw a name out, Neil Demers Gray. I don't know if he's on this call or not, but he was very instrumental in forming a lot of gay support groups, gay bowling club to a gay business club. He was really a major activist. And I think he incentivized me and gave me the courage to actually get involved with politics, to be honest. And I remember back in the 90s, just the 90s, okay, mid 90s, the city of Ventura had an ordinance on the books saying that when the first gay club actually opened up, they wanted to have music and allow people to dance. Well, guess what? In Ventura, it was against the law for same-sex couples to dance. So I had to go to a vote for the city council to overturn that, which this council did. I think 4 council members voted. And then when Neil was interviewed by the Ventura County Star, I'll never forget his quote, what he said. They asked him, what do you think about this now that you're able to, they're going to allow same-sex couples to dance? And Neil said, well, in 1973, we were allowed to have sex and now we can dance. And I thought that was very poignant because, it seemed like such a no-brainer, but the fact that for 100 years it was on the books that same-sex people of the same sex could not dance together in public. So like I said, slowly but surely we're making progress. I believe like through not just in Ventura, but across the world, the AIDS pandemic brought the LGBTQ community together and brought our allies in the straight community to help us through a very, very tough time. I think things happen for a reason. And when I look at silver linings of the many people that I lost in my life and the many beautiful people that should still be here today, but unfortunately succumbed to the AIDS pandemic, the silver lining to me is that we made significant steps forward to equality and acceptance and visibility that we are all here and it's beautiful that we're all different. And I think that goes a long ways. I look at this next generation and I just think it makes me smile because the issues of what we had growing up, what I went through as a teenager, understanding that it was something people hated. It's still not easy, but it's gotten a lot easier to be who we are. And the world becomes a much, much healthier place because of it. So.
Wow. Well, thank you. We are right up at the end, and I had so many more great questions, but we don't have any time for them. I really, really wish we did. I do want to say Kate Mclean joined us. Kate Mclean is the chair of the president of the board of the Museum of Ventura County and was the CEO of the Ventura County Community Foundation. Yes. She mentioned early on when you were talking about your work in the 90s. So, and I know you worked with them. Doug, just to reveal to everybody, I've known Doug personally for a really long time. And one of the things that really struck me, it's always struck me, but I never really realized it until I read your book, is you've accomplished a lot of things, Doug. And there have been a lot of things like the amphitheater that you haven't been able to get done yet. And it is truly admirable, truly, how you just keep on working at it. You keep on trying and you get to really amazing, great places that you never thought you would. And so I really just want to thank you for keeping on. And I'm so glad that you have more time. You need more time, by the way, obviously. And I want to thank everybody for coming and being a part of this conversation, and thank you all. And Doug, stay on the line for a little bit. I'd love to chat with you just a little bit before we're done. And thank you Elena, to everyone.
And Elena, if I could just say that you, as well as Carolyn and Kate and so many others in Ventura, truly inspire me and give me the strength to continue. So really, thanks for being part of my life and being a good friend. So, and thanks to all of you for taking time tonight to listen to this little broadcast. And maybe next time we'll see each other in person. We're still hoping to have our holiday party coming up in December. We'll see.
Okay. Fingers crossed. We all read about it in the book. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.